Welcome back to the Fearless Project channel. This is The Overlook, and I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman. And today we are going to take a deep dive into the evolution of Tucker Carlson and his policy positions and asking the question, why such a stark shift over the last 2 years? Now, if you've been following Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, you'll know that their very common bit is we're just asking questions. We're just asking questions about the start of World War I, World War II, the assassination of JFK, 9/11, Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, at TPUSA, Tucker Carlson made the claim that Jeffrey Epstein, acting on behalf of Mossad, used the information, the blackmail of his complex sex slave ring to blackmail the United States. Now, I think all of us can agree that there are many questions to be had about Epstein. And yes, it reflects deep-seated corruption. Mossad was probably involved. But to then claim that the United States is controlled by Israel is a huge, huge leap. And he's made that claim by looking at different parts of history, specifically World War II. I've done a whole podcast episode on that. We're going to revisit that a little bit here today. And he's cozied up to Islamic nations such as Iran. His really quick 30-minute interview with the president of Iran, the lead up to the United States strike against Iran's nuclear bunkers, was quite telling. He referred to Iran as a country and Israel as a regime, and he showed the utmost respect for the president of Iran, something he failed to also show Ted Cruz in his interview with a senator prior to the interview he did with the president of Iran. He's also interviewed the president of Qatar. Both interviews are soft-hitting questions. They sound pre-scripted, doesn't ask him a single hard-hitting question specifically about Christians, which Tucker Carlson seems to muster up Christian moral outrage for Christians living in the West Bank and Gaza, despite the fact that Christians living in Bethlehem are living in Palestinian-controlled territory under the Palestinian Authority, and that Christians in Gaza are living under the authority of Hamas. Now, despite all of that, he conflates that to mean persecution of Christians in Israel, and he failed to ask the president of Iran about the lack of religious pluralism in the Iranian regime and the persecution of open Christians, as well as the fastest growing underground church in the whole world, which is in Iran. And of course, we know that growing churches underground grow due to persecution because they can't grow in the light. And we praise God for doing a work in Iran. But nonetheless, it is in spite of the Iranian regime because of their religious persecution. So I want to revisit some of the things that Tucker Carlson said at the beginning of this summer, as the summer draws to a close, about what war with Iran would look like. So in the lead up to the decision to actually target Iran's nuclear facilities, we had Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, but we're just focusing on Tucker today, essentially promising that we would lose a war with Iran. Now, let's just be clear. Tucker's also said this about Russia, by the way. We have seen that China, after COVID, is essentially a paper tiger, although the strongest as far as capabilities of the three axis of chaos countries. The other two members of that, of course, are Iran and then Russia. All three countries have an anti-Western vision of the world, and they would love to be a world hegemonic power. But of course, the United States being, and I think I can comfortably say this now, the sole global superpower, there's been a realignment post-COVID-19 and now with President Trump's second term, leaves no room for China, Russia, or Iran to rival the United States' capabilities on the world stage. And despite this fact, which is just it's a fact, Tucker Carlson claimed that we would lose a war with Russia. And then in this tweet that's on the screen, he says that we would lose a war with Iran. This was posted April 7th, has 9.7 million views. This is why I talk about Tucker, because Tucker is extremely influential. And he made these bold claims, was proven completely wrong. The fear-mongering that he instilled in the conservative movement on the right turned out to be false, and he should be held accountable for that. He goes, whatever you think of tariffs, it's clear that now is the worst possible time for the United States to participate in a military strike against Iran. This is something else that Tucker does. Tucker will say, okay, well, because of our economic policy, now will be a really, really horrible time for a war. Yes, we're not going to actually enter a war because Iran doesn't have the capability to counter the United States attack, which would then initiate a war with the United States. But Tucker does this in his America First policy strategy. He says, look at how horrible the subway system and the poverty and the homelessness in New York is, or Chicago, or San Francisco. Look at our veterans on the street. Look at rampant crime. Look at illegals crossing the border into the United States, molesting and killing our young American girls. These were all policies under the Biden administration, which were disastrous in the first 200 days. The Trump administration has reversed a lot of those policies and the implications of those policies, thank God. But nonetheless, Tucker will take an example like crime in New York City, which is a city, municipal, or state level policy, the result of Democratic policies, and say, so then why are we giving money to Israel? Or we must be controlled by Israel to give them money, because why should we as Americans pledge allegiance to another nation if our nation is in shambles? And that argument kind of fell apart when Trump won, because they've done such an amazing job in the first 200 days. But again, he conflates, in this example, economic policy with foreign policy, or I think a bigger disparity is conflating domestic, either local or state level policies with foreign policy and US grand strategy. Those are very, very different things. And the realm in which to fix those are very different. Many of those things the Trump administration cannot fix because they're at a federal level. And so long as New Yorkers keep electing Democratic mayors, or the state of New York elects a Democratic representative or senator, those policies are going to continue. So this is a difference between federal and state level policies. But again, Tucker conflates those things into one big jumbled up mess and asks, well, why are we giving money to Israel? Okay. So in this, he's saying tariffs, which now we have not felt the economic implications again of the fear mongering that was happening with that. He's saying we can't participate in a military strike on Iran. We can't afford it. Thousands of Americans would die. We lose the war that follows. And I've used this analogy before, Tucker boldly stating to 9.7 million people that the United States would lose a war with Iran is preposterous. That is like betting your money on your local middle school football team against like the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. The capabilities between your middle school football team and between a team that has won the Super Bowl before and one of the best teams in the NFL is preposterous. And that is essentially an analogy for what he's claiming here between the capabilities of the United States and Iran. Nothing would be more destructive to our country. Actually, Islamism, the influence of Qatar and of Iran, that's definitely more destructive. Look at what's happening in the UK. And yet we're closer than ever, thanks to the unrelenting pressure from neocons. Again, I've talked about this. Neocon is just synonymous with Jews. This is suicidal. Anyone advocating for conflict with Iran is not an ally of the United States, but an enemy. This is also something Tucker does. He talks about, you should only have allegiance to your country. He said this in his TPUSA speech, which I will link below, which I think is quite ironic. He says you can't have an allegiance to another foreign country. And of course, he jumps straight to Israel. But I would say his policy positions are in allegiance to Iran and Russia and Qatar and this axis of chaos. Not so much China, but definitely in the Middle East and with Russia. Rewriting history, rewriting the end of the Cold War, villainizing the West as if we should apologize for winning World War I, World War II, or the Cold War is preposterous. So again, if they just ask the questions, well, why? I think we should ask the questions, well, why would you take such an extreme and ahistorical and just manipulated position that does not reflect the facts? But again, Tucker loves to ask in his laugh, like, oh, then you're an enemy of the state. And he does like this villain laugh. Sounds like he should be the next, they should cast him in the next James Bond movie for the villain. So he made this bold claim that we were going to send thousands of Americans and they're going to die. That didn't happen. He tried to liken any potential conflict with Iran with what happened in Iraq in 2003. And this idea that weapons of mass destruction is just a lie that the neocons, the Jews, the pro-Israel, the pro-Zionist lobby was perpetuating in order to push President Trump to engage militarily with Iran. And again, they crippled the Iranian regime. They have not responded. And even if they had responded, it would have been ceremonial, very similar to how they attacked Israel in the spring and April of 2024, which was a weak response meant to be shot down. But the regime, being an authoritarian regime, has to save face. Okay, so and then in this tweet, He's talking about Mark Levin going to the White House to lobby for war with Iran. Again, that was never what conservatives who are not on the isolationist track were advocating for. He claimed that Mark Levin was demanding that American troops do it. We need to stop Iran from building nuclear weapons. He and like-minded ideologues in Washington are now arguing they're just weeks away. I mean, we've known that the Iranian regime was close to the enrichment that they needed for a nuclear weapon. The regime touts this when they scream death to America. Of course, he asked the president of Iran about the death to America chant, of which the president of Iran said, oh, that's just symbolic political rhetoric. We mean death to American tyranny. And in that sense, Tucker sounds a lot more like the woke left and this neo-Marxist left, which claims that America is a force for neocolonialism. There is some paralleling rhetoric between Tucker Carlson and that political thought in the United States, which essentially apologizes for American interventionism, for America on the world stage. He goes on to claim, so why is Mark Levin once again hyperventilating about weapons of mass destruction? To distract you from the real goal. This is something him and Candace have always kind of played into. And again, in a post-COVID-19 world, a lot of conservatives are skeptical of the official narrative, of the quote unquote experts. So he's leaning into that. He's saying, okay, well, he's talking about weapons of mass destruction, but it's just to distract you from the real goal. And what is the real goal? Regime change. Young Americans headed back to the Middle East to topple yet another regime. Again, he's playing into the fears of 2003 happening again. Virtually no one will say this out loud. Well, it's because that's not what they want. And that's also not what happened. America's record of overthrowing foreign leaders is so embarrassingly counterproductive that regime change has become a synonym for disaster. Officially, no one supports it. So instead of telling the truth, again, because everyone in DC is a liar and controlled by the Zionists, according to Tucker, he's the only truth teller. So instead of telling you the truth about their motives, they manipulate hysteria, which is it's so crazy because him and Candace do this. He's the one manufacturing hysteria that American troops are going to go die in Iran. Okay. He's manufacturing hysteria that we would lose a war with Iran. A country like Iran can never have the bomb. Well, it's true. They can't. They'll nuke Los Angeles. We have to act now. He goes on to say that essentially Mark Levin doesn't hate weapons of mass destruction. It's the ideology of the Iranian government, which is he's trying to lobby to overthrow. Yeah, we should all hate the regime that governs Iran, not the Iranian people, because people love to conflate those two things. So you hate Iranians. No. In fact, ironically, Iranians are some of the biggest supporters of Israel because they understand what Islamic authoritarian tyranny looks like because they've lived under it since the late 70s. So here we had Tucker essentially claiming that World War III was about to break out. Okay, it didn't. He's not run that back. Instead, he has laid into his anti-Israel conspiracy. And again, he claims that it was the Israel lobby because Israel wanted to have America do the bidding on behalf of Israel to overthrow their biggest adversary, Iran. Again, Iran is a threat to both the United States and Israel. If they could do what happened on October 7th to Americans on American soil, they would. They just don't have the capabilities to do so. And the time to hit the Iranian regime was when they didn't have a nuclear bomb, because that's when our strategic power and influence in those negotiations is most powerful. Okay, so if they had obtained the bomb, they now become a country kind of like North Korea, where you have to capitulate to a rogue nation that might try and use the bomb at any time. Okay, so Tucker, of course, has been on this anti-Israel hysteria, but he claims that he's not obsessed with Israel. He holds the same standard to every country. Although if you look at his podcast, every episode is about the state of Israel. Milk Bar TV put this compilation together, and we're just gonna watch it. And also to point out that Tucker Carlson, being outraged that Senator Ted Cruz didn't know the population of Iran precisely, but then throwing really softball questions to the president of Iran, that should be telling. Every American should question why he went at the throat of Ted Cruz, even if he vehemently disagrees with his policies, specifically when it comes to Israel. But then you're going to throw softball questions at the president of Iran or the prime minister of Qatar, and you're essentially an apologist. You are allowing them to use your platform with millions of viewers to push anti-Western ideas and frame America and the West and Israel which is the West's biggest ally in the Middle East, as the villain. Okay. So we're going to look at every time, and this was published on August 14th. So I'm sure that this number has since been updated, but this is every time that Israel has been mentioned on Tucker Carlson's show since he told Ted Cruz that he's not obsessed. So this is from essentially the beginning of the summer to now, not from October 7th, almost 2 years ago. John Mearsheimer, he's a famous international political realist theorist, and he's very anti-Israel. And this is the Islamist nun that he had on. There's that villain laugh. And that was just, if you look at the timestamp, this is from June 19th to August 12th. So this is about 2 months worth of content. Israel was mentioned 800 times. Podcast he does mentions Israel, every single one of them. So yeah, I think he's obsessed with Israel, but I think his overlords are the ones who are obsessed with Israel because they're the ones providing these kind of talking points. But it's this like anti-Israel derangement syndrome. Okay, yeah, you want to make a fair critique about Israel? Go ahead. But for every episode you do to be focused on Israel, it's a little bit crazy. I think that's when people should take a step back and go, that's a little weird, don't you think? Okay, what's also weird is that Tucker Carlson has gone from, casually questioning the official narrative at Fox News, which is something else we'll talk about in a second. He frames his leaving of Fox News as him, leaving because of corrupt elites, not because Fox News was sued by the Dominion voting machines for claims Tucker Carlson made on air. So he was let go for different reasons, and I think he's spun it in a way that's kind of like Candace did. I'm just for the American people. I'm anti-corruption. And so he has like this whole platform that gives this illusion that he's anti-elitism. Okay, so one, he was still at Fox. He has some casual World War II revisionism. And then now he has descended into openly arguing that the Allied forces were blackmailed by the Zionists to basically aggravate Hitler and escalate World War II, which is completely false. World War II started with Hitler's invasion of Poland and then Czechoslovakia and the Nazi regime's desire for living space for the German people, which meant moving eastward into Russia. This was all outlined in Mein Kampf. And that included not just absorbing parts of Poland that used to be part of Germany, which is what Daryl Cooper claims, but also parts of Czechoslovakia, and then moving into the East, which was not part of the historic Germanic peoples' ancestral, homeland. At the same time, World War II started and was declared before Winston Churchill was prime minister. So this claim that Winston Churchill was blackmailed into aggressing World War II is insane. Also because the Nazi regime was very clearly an expansionist power. They had ambitions of expanding. And I mean, Hitler even taking kind of like notes out of Napoleon's playbook, especially when moving into Russia. So this idea that and this is crazy, is this idea that the Jews manipulated Winston Churchill, the Zionist manipulated Winston Churchill to initiate World War II, somehow lie about the Holocaust, then justify the founding of the state of Israel, is the most insane claim that anyone could ever make, ever. And with that claim is that, well, actually 6 million European Jews didn't actually die in the Holocaust. And it is that actually really fuels me to speak out against Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, because I've been to the camps. I've been walking down streets in Europe, even in Spain where I used to live, and on the sidewalks, they'll have these little gold tiles that tell you the name of the Jew who used to live in that building, when they were deported, and if they died or survived the Holocaust. Most of them, it has their death date on that tile. The legacy of the Holocaust is riddled all over Europe if you take the time to look. And so that is why I'm so passionate about this work. And I think this is the most deplorable part of Tucker Carlson's new persona, new policy position, in addition to becoming like sympathetic to Sharia law and Islamism and downplaying the atrocities of Islamism and the persecution of Christians under Sharia law, downplaying that and trying to manipulate that as part of like some greater Jewish conspiracy is insane to me. And in the episode he did with the Islamist nun, he essentially implies, and I'm going to do a whole episode on this, that it's actually since the state of Israel was founded that Christian persecution has started in the Middle East. So not just that Christian persecution is happening in Israel, as Tucker claims, but that somehow they've manipulated that across the entire region and all of the other Muslim countries. That's crazy to claim that Israel has that kind of level of power and influence. And it's kind of like this manufactured Christian outrage. I'm gonna look at Marjorie Taylor Greene's interview with Megyn Kelly shortly, and in that she also makes kind of like this Christian claim about Israel. And it's wild to me that you can try and make a claim about Christian persecution and not look at Islamism in the region. Okay, but I digress. This is also from Milk Bar TV, and it kind of shows you the evolution of Tucker Carlson's casual World War II skepticism to full out siding with Hitler. The screen, so you can see it too. To say that the UK did not win in any meaningful way, yeah, they're not speaking German. That is the meaningful way. When you have an aggressor rogue nation that has expansionist ambitions, you not being surrounded by that nation, hoping to be an empire, or not being overtaken by that nation or expanding empire is the win. Like the UK not speaking German is the win. France not speaking German is the win. The current map of Europe that we have is the win, Tucker. It's like such a ludicrous thing to say. I think Candace asked, she was doing an interview at a TPUSA conference, and this British interviewer asks her, like, well, do you think that the West is like better off for winning World War II? And she like thinks she's being so smart and witty, and she asks him back, like, well, do you think that the US is better off? And she's like asking a man from the UK. Yeah, he would be speaking German. He'd be speaking English to you with a German accent. It's so crazy. And even ideologically, what the Nazi regime stood for, the West is better off that the Allied forces won. And to make a claim other than that is so preposterous to me, because then my question to Daryl Cooper and Tucker Carlson is, okay, so what's the alternative? What was the better outcome? I mean, yeah, war is messy. That's something else Tucker like conflates, is like, well, so many people died in World War II. Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, that is the inherent nature of war and conflict. But the world is better off with all of its faults and all of its pitfalls, and because we're sinful humans, we have sinful human nature. As Christians, we recognize that. There is no perfect governance. There is no perfect global order. But a world in which the United States is the hegemonic power of the world, I think is a lot better than Nazi Germany. This is also crazy because the Eastern Front of World War II and the Pacific Front were two different fronts. And of course, Pearl Harbor being the kind of impetus for the war that started in the Pacific, which was the Japanese Empire, which also had imperial ambitions, enacting war on the United States. So then Tucker, this like bleeding, red, white, blue-hearted American, is somehow okay with aggression against the United States, against our troops on our own soil. Like that should go unanswered. What happened with Winston Churchill and the quote Zionist in the East has relatively nothing to do with what happened in the Pacific, insofar as there were two fronts that we were fighting in that war. So that's just a complete falsity as far as like representing World War II history. And what do you mean, did we win in any meaningful way? Yeah, the Japanese and the Nazis didn't win World War II. That is the win. Both of whom were the aggressors and the agitators for this global conflict. And again, trying to then like tie the Pacific Front into the Zionist agenda in Europe is like so unintelligent. I don't think he pursues that line of thinking. But it's wild to me because again, so what was the alternative? We let the Japanese absorb our, Pacific Front of the United States, and we let the Nazis and the Germans, come through Mexico, which they try to make a pact with, and take over the eastern half of the United States. Was that like a better outcome or alternative? Or should we just have sat down both the Japanese and the Germans and asked them really, really nicely, like he wanted us to ask the Iranians to give up their nuclear weapons? Should we just have asked Hitler nicer? You're right. It was our fault. It was America's fault. We didn't ask nice enough. Where is it? It's still there today. And in fact, the only reason why Western civilization in Europe is falling is because of the Islamists who have moved in. Again, Tucker never has an issue with Islamism, and what's happening in real time right now, and the threat Islamism is to Western civilization and its anti-Western agenda and anti-Christian agenda. Also, for Tucker Carlson, who's like this moral Christian, the Nazi Party was pagan. They used influence within the German church, but they were not like this like pro-Christian regime or government. He also ignores that fact, similarly to the Islamist. He only cares about the Christians when he tries to frame them as the victims of the Jews or the victims of Winston Churchill, who's being manipulated by the Jews. But again, like even with the Piers Morgan interview, he's like, I'm not defending the Nazis, but like, how did he save Western civilization? So then what is your objection? What's the point of your objection, Tucker? I want to know what the alternative reality you would have preferred and what would have saved quote unquote Western civilization had it not been the Allied forces winning World War II. So then this is also where Tucker's like, there's like this war against Christians because of secularism. I don't know why he exactly pinpoints 1914, except for the fact that that's the start of World War I, which he, I'm sure, blames the Jews for. But secularism is a religion in and of its own. We've seen that happen here in the United States with what's happening on the left, and postmodernism. Of course, I'm sure he also blames the Jews on that. But it's really, really ludicrous. And this is the other thing Tucker will do too. He appeals to being a red, white, and blue, like Constitution bleeding American. Like he'll never, in the TPUSA speech he made, he said like he will never leave America or get dual citizenship anywhere else because this is his country. But then in that clip, he's harkening back to like the glory days of his ancestors in Europe. But he also says that his family's been here since like the Revolutionary War. So I don't know which one it is. And it's interesting if you listen to Carlson's rhetoric, it's actually very, very similar to the Nazi regimes, which is this idea of the Nazis trying to restore the German people back to a former glory day, right? And Tucker does that same thing. Like he wants to restore America back to an unpinpointed time in history, whether that be 1914, the end of the war, 1945, the Second World War, or the end of the Cold War. He's pretty ambiguous with it, but you'll hear him say things like, oh, like this America is not the America of my youth, but doesn't pinpoint a year or a policy or a historic event. But he'll reference like World War I, World War II, which he wasn't alive for, and then the Cold War and the fall of the Cold War and the USSR. So then again with that, it's like, okay, so would the world be better off if the Cold War had never ended and we had, you know, the Soviets threatening Western security? Is that better? It's very unclear what he's getting at, except for the fact that he hates that the West won World War II. Crazy. Okay. So that's Tucker on World War II. Now I want to turn to Sharia law, because this is kind of what I'm getting at now. So World War II history is important to remember, first off, because history repeats itself. Second off, because the Nazi regime was close and had ties to Islamism in the Middle East at that time and had formidable alliances. And the fact that if you even walk in Bethlehem, there's this mall in Bethlehem you have to walk through, it's all Arab, to get to the Church of the Nativity. And there's always books lined up like in the street, like it's a market, it's an Arab market. And without a doubt, every single time I've been there, I have seen Mein Kampf. There are copies of Mein Kampf being sold in Palestinian controlled territory in the West Bank. So there is still a connection to Nazi ideology and the destruction of the Jews that lives on today and is very much a part of the Islamist ideology in the region. It's like this unholy alliance. And that dates back to World War II. So it's important to remember World War II for that. It's also important to remember the facts of World War II to set it straight that yes, we are so much better off that the Allied forces won. But to a certain extent, like the past is in the past. And yes, it dictates the future. But what's happening now is a war between the West and the Islamic world and Sharia law. And Tucker will say, like he said in the last video, like if you look at Europe, like Europe's falling and Christian Europe is falling. Yes, because of secularism, but also because of the huge influx of migrants from Africa and the Middle East who have brought Islamism with them and have failed to assimilate. Look at the UK. Look at France, even look at Sweden and parts of Scandinavia that used to be thought of as like the pinnacle of democratic socialism and left-leaning governance and ideology. Sweden's having a huge influx of domestic terrorism, which is also widely underreported because it contradicts the left's approach and stance on Islamism. Anyways, this is Tucker on Sharia law. And I think at the end of the day, if there's one thing that we can point to as an indicator of where Tucker Carlson's allegiance lies, it's in how he addresses the Middle East, countries like Iran and Qatar being a state sponsor of terrorism, house the Muslim Brotherhood, house members of Hamas in Qatar, the lead members of Hamas, which have all been taken out now since October 7th, were billionaires who lived lavish and large lives in Qatar. Qatar funds Hamas. Qatar is like this official state sponsor of terrorism that the world just plays with as a legitimate actor. And Tucker seems to be enamored by the Gulf states as like this beautiful alternative to the West, although he claims to love Western civilization, so that's a little bit confusing as well. Oh wait, let me get the evil laugh. Okay. I want to replay that part because this goes to what I was saying when Tucker tries to compare domestic, local, Democrat-run cities and their failed policies to something that is institutionalized in the Middle East and which is a mechanism and tool for Islamic authoritarian regimes to control their own people, to persecute Christians in the region and Jews, of course, of which he doesn't care about the Jews, but he should care about the Christians. So I want to replay that. What it actually is. Okay, because what's happening in New York and Detroit is the result of corruption at the state and local level, 100%. It's horrific. But Sharia law is a collective ideology that persecutes women, Christians, and seeks to kill the infidels, being Christians and Jews, and to take over the entire world. So yeah, I actually think Sharia law is worse than what's happening in Detroit and New York. And it goes against everything that Tucker claims that he truly loves, that apparently the Jews hate, which is Western civilization, Christians, and flourishing Christian societies here at home and in Europe, which is true. So under Sharia law, Christians, people of the book, are not classified as infidels or people of the book, and they're given, especially under the Ottoman Empire, legacy of that is dhimmi status, which is second-class citizenship. And that's used as a form of persecution. As Tucker said in that 2017 clip, you cannot spread the good news. And he asked the Islamist nun that he had on his podcast, well, can you evangelize in the West Bank? And she skirts around it and she goes, well, I'm Orthodox and Orthodox don't actually like evangelize in the same way, blah, blah, blah. No, you can't. You cannot openly evangelize in Islamic countries in the Middle East. And under Sharia law, you cannot witness the good news of Christ, which is something that Tucker Carlson should care about. And apparently he cared about in 2017, but he doesn't care about now. A rape rate of 0. Okay, well, first off, if a woman is raped under Sharia law or even like in Islamic countries, there's a great deal of shame that comes with that. Women's rights don't exist. Individual rights like that don't exist. The Gulf states are kind of an exemplar of Islamic run countries, although that's kind of a facade. And we're going to look at that in a second. But under Sharia law, a woman has to, I think, bear 6 witnesses to her rape. And they all have to be men. And if she's found to have lied about it, she's sentenced to death. So yeah, rape's probably not reported on in the same way that it is here in the West because of the rights that women are protected in the West, which is, you know, directly linked back to Christian influence in the Judeo-Christian values that shape the West, which focuses on the individual inherent value that all of us have, which is attributed back to the gospel and what Jesus preached, not what Muhammad preached. I mean, it's insane. Apparently, he's okay with ridding America of the filth of the Jews compared to what's happening in Detroit. Again, those are different. That is like comparing apples and not even, I don't even want to say an orange, like a huge, huge watermelon. Like, yes, policies in Detroit, Democrat run cities, corruption, it runs deep. It's horrible. It's horrific. And the people caught in the middle of that are victims of that corruption. But to then somehow say that like what's happening in Detroit is worse than Sharia law is wild to me. And then here's the other thing too, because he talked about the Gulf states. The Gulf states have to import a ton of foreign migrant workers. And there's an immense amount of slavery in the UAE. Migrant workers make up 90% of the UAE's labor force. And the conditions have been called a form of modern day slavery. So yeah, if you're going as a wealthy tourist or just as a Western tourist to the UAE, to Dubai, I've been to Dubai. All of my servers were from India, Africa, similar to if you've been on a cruise ship, where a lot of these workers come from around the world to make ends meet for their families and send all the money home. You have luring workers with lies, so promising them good pay and jobs, but only providing them migrants meager wages, debt deception, providing travel to the UAE, and then surprising them with a bill for their travel and saddling them with debts that they won't be able to pay back for years, if ever, so they have to stay there. Trapping workers in a country in jobs where they're mistreated through confiscation of passports. So this is literally the definition of slavery, is prohibiting their freedom of movement through coercion and confiscating their passports. The conditions are horrific, and a lack of legal rights and protections. So apparently Tucker just thinks that the UAE and Abu Dhabi and Dubai are just like these beautiful examples of countries where rape doesn't exist because women don't have the same rights, or it's not reported on, and it's all a facade. And the cities, which are beautiful, are built on the backs of migrant workers who are essentially labor slaves. Okay. So that's what Tucker thinks is a beautiful, beautiful alternative to the United States. Okay. This clip I want to look at because I think it perfectly demonstrates, and I've shown this on the podcast before, Tucker Carlson's shift on the war in Iraq. And I think I don't believe that Bush era policies were good overall. I think there's a ton you can critique about the Bush administration, corruption that existed there. I think something fallacious when talking about the war in Iraq is not making your audience aware of the huge role Iran played in destabilizing the rebuilding of Iraq after the 2003 invasion, because Iraq and Iran were at war with each other prior to that. And so just as Iran has destabilized the entire region through chaos, they did that in Iraq as well. But in this clip I'm about to show you, Tucker Carlson is talking about Iraqis who are semi-illiterate primitive monkeys. And there's a huge shift to today. And again, just asking questions, why? Why that humongous shift? So I'm going to play you this clip. When I first saw this clip, I was absolutely shocked. And I think it kind of speaks for itself. Okay. That is, like, I think the true Tucker Carlson, like a true elitist. Shut the F up and obey. That's Tucker, not this like, oh, Sharia law and like this laughing it off. Like, I think he's downplaying all those things because allegedly there's some influence involved, which we're going to look at towards the end of this. But I think this is true Tucker Carlson coming out, a true Nepo elitist, which is what he is. The thumbnail for this video is Tucker before and after his official cable network career, from which he was on CNN and Fox News, and his calling card used to be the bow tie, and he's like this little nerdy Nepo baby whose dad was, I believe, in broadcast television as well, worked for the CIA, I believe, covertly. And who is an elitist through and through. And then he gets fired from Fox News. Similarly, again, similar arc to Candace Owens in the sense of, oh my gosh, look at me, I'm being fired because I'm challenging the elites. He was fired because he cost Fox News a ton of money in lawsuits. And he rebranded. And then, his set changed from, mainstream cable network news to a cabin with a bunch of memorabilia that's like so all Americana because he just loves America. And he wears fly fishing vest, and he just loves to fly fish. And he has like a green screen background of like a babbling brook. Like he's just me and you. I think in his TPUSA speech, he also said like, he would never leave America because his parents are literally buried right across the street from where he lives. Like he's just a blue collar American who is just asking questions. He is just an American, all Americana man who loves to fly fish. He's so simple. He's anti-elitism, anti-corruption. Like the physical and aesthetic evolution of Tucker, I think perfectly exemplifies what he's trying to win over his audience to believe, which is that he is anti-elitism, that he is anti-corruption, despite the fact that if you look and listen to what he is saying, it is anything but America first or America only. It's America tethered to the Near East, the Middle East, Iran, Qatar. And again, you should ask why. Okay. So Iraq. That's Tucker Carlson in all of his glory. Okay, so why did I show you all of this? Because I think it's important to take Tucker's own word for it and listen to his evolution. Yeah, can people change their mind? 100%. But the extreme to which he's changed his mind, how he's gone about doing that, changing his aesthetic, changing his messaging, playing into the fears of your average everyday American, which I'm sure he thinks just as little of as the Iraqis he was just describing, as being unintelligent, simple. Because his messaging is kind of simple. It's stupid. Like, look at what's happening in Detroit. Oh, so Sharia law is not that bad. And honestly, your average American who's not nerdy like me, who listens to a bunch of podcasts or has been to the Middle East, might say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." But it's a lie. And again, a lie for what? So in conclusion, I want to highlight the man behind Donald Trump Jr. He's Donald Trump Jr.'s boss, and Donald Trump Jr. is also one of these America First individuals leaning into the Tucker Carlson realm. And he was Tucker Carlson's financer for his independent media brand when he left Fox News. Omid Malik is his name. And he comes from a Muslim background. I believe one of his parents is Iranian, the other is Pakistani. He used to run in the Clinton circles and the Obama circles, and then kind of had a MAGA transformation, as a lot of people on the left have had. And he has a firm called the 1789 Capital. It was the largest investor in Tucker Carlson's company. And they're asking basically, was this man, Omid Malik, an opportunist who converted to MAGA for the money? Here's what I'll say. A lot of people on the left and Qatar, because we know the Free Press has also done a really great job of demonstrating how Qatari money has flooded into the United States through lobbying, hundreds of billions of dollars. The money follows the power and the influence. So just like the left for the last decade, their talking points all the same. Their social justice talking points, identical. They were all being funded for. They were all being organized. They were all being told what to say. And their talking points were all so cohesive and similar. It only makes sense that this was happening at a very high level organized propaganda campaign. And the same thing's happening on the right? We hear terms like warmonger, elitists, the Jews, Zionist lobby, AIPAC. The talking points are all cohesive, whether it be Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about it, Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, now maybe Megyn Kelly, which I'm like, please, Megyn, don't. I love Megyn Kelly. She's been a good ally to Israel on October 7th stuff. But the money just follows the power because there's this MAGA all-Americana shift happening in the United States. And so there's this idea that and so Malik's not hanging out in Palm Beach. He's Trump Jr.'s boss, which means influence. The money just followed the power and influence. And there's a huge conservative shift that's happened. And so there's this, I think, false sense of trust in the Tucker Carlsons or in the Candace Owens personalities as like, oh no, they're representing their own interests because they're on independent platforms now. But new media is now mainstream media. Like Candace and Tucker reach more people than cable news reaches. And the Qatari lobby and the Qatari influence and the Iranian influence knows that. And the money has followed that. They're not interested in who is spreading an anti-Israel, anti-Jewish ideology. They're interested in their ideology prevailing. And something that is just so curious with this new wave of MAGA, this MAGA 2.0, the woke right, whatever you want to call it, is that they align with the woke left on the issue of the Jews and on the issue of Israel. And you should ask yourself why. Why are the Jews and Israel the only thing that the woke left and the right seem to now agree on? And both sides excuse Islamism, which is inherently contradictory to what a very left-leaning liberal believes in, whether that be LGBTQ plus rights, women's rights. On the conservative side, religious pluralism, the rights of Christians, the rights to spread the good news and the gospel, ideas of Western civilization that are core to conservatism. Islamism is inherently a contradiction to both sides of the political aisle, and yet they ignore the threat of Islamism and they agree on this threat of the Jews. So ask yourself why. Ask yourself, who's orchestrating that? Why are the talking points so similar? I mean, Tucker rejects everything about the woke left, but he talks neo-Marxist language about Israel and about the role of the West throughout all of history and the evil force of American foreign policy and how it acts as a force for neocolonialism. That's essentially what Tucker Carlson is saying. So the question is, how did he arrive there when everything else he self-proclaims about his worldview is in contradiction to that? And also, why has Tucker Carlson's platform become an anti-Israel platform? I mean, I think it's garnered him a ton of views. So I think at the very least, we can claim it's for influence and personal growth for his network. But then on top of that, it's a good question to ask, like, well, where's the money flowing from? So we know one of those places is from Omid Malik, and he's running in the Trump Jr. circles and the circles that are pushing this America First isolationist agenda. We saw that rear its head when it came to responding to Iran earlier this summer. I've also shown on this YouTube channel, let me see if I can quickly find it. The Washington Examiner did a piece on Tucker Carlson and looked through fair registration to see that an LLC was paid quite a large sum of money to interview the prime minister of Qatar. And yeah, here we go. And I think the Washington Examiner is the only place I saw this story breaking. Again, because Qatar's influence is so embedded in mainstream media on the left and the right that no one is going to be like reporting on this. But yeah, so conservative media targeted by Qatari foreign influence operations. So between January 1st, 2024 and election day, just over 10% of communications sent by Qatari foreign agents to the media were directed to conservative outlets and commentators, according to the Washington Examiner's review of the Department of Justice records, which is fair registration, which is like the registration that the woke right wants APAC to be under, which is like the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Oh no, I have to get a plan. Let me see. Can I get to the record showing? No. Okay, well, I'm gonna link this down below. I'm gonna try and get the PDF version of it. But this is an important part. So since Republicans won control of the White House and Congress on election day, the proportion of messages sent by Qatari operatives to conservative outlets and commentators has surged to more than half of their total correspondence with the media. They're following the influence, which means Tucker and Candace. They go on to talk about Tucker Carlson's interview with the Qatari prime minister, and how it raked in nearly 6 million views. And it says Qatar paid top dollar to ensure this interview took place. Foreign Agents Registration Act's records show that Lumen 8 Advisors LLC, a legal consulting company for which very little public information is available, helped facilitate the interview between Carlson and the Qatari dignitary. And if you are able to get access to this article, it links to the actual Justice Department record of that. So don't be deceived by sheep's and wolves clothing just because they're conservative or because they claim to care about the same things you care about. All right. I hope this was all informative and that you were able to listen to Tucker himself. I will link what I can in the description box down below, and I will see you in the next episode. Like always, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.